My name's Bonny, and I'm a pirate. Oh, I can see the looks on them faces. You didn't know that women could be pirates, did you? You've heard that back in the 18th century when I lived, that women couldn't do the same things as men. And maybe you've even heard all those rumors about how a woman's bad luck to have on a ship. Well, I'm here to tell you that all those things that you might have heard are absolutely true. But you see, the sort of person who wants to become a pirate, she don't pay attention to no rules at all. My story starts a long, long time ago. Starts back in 1696. And it starts far across the sea, in the land of Ireland, in County Cork, where there lived a man named William Cormac. Now, Mr. Cormac was a fine, rich man. He was a property man. He was an attorney. And he had a fine, grand house, and he had a fine, grand wife, and he had several servants living in that house. And everything was looking just fine for Mr. Cormac, up until the point that one of his serving maids comes up pregnant. Well, of course, she's not married. They don't allow married girls to be serving maids. So this is quite the scandal. And there was a particular sort of things that you did when one of your serving maids became pregnant, which was that you took all of her money away from her, you threw her out in the street, and you did your very best to make sure that she never worked as a serving maid for anybody else again. And that's what Mr. Cormac should have done. But he didn't. Oh, no, he didn't. He kept her on. And when his wife said that she would throw the serving maid out into the street, he said, "Don't you dare." And when the wife raised the neighbors about this great scandal, so none of the neighbors would talk to her, he said, "Now look here. I happen to be in love with this serving maid, and I like her quite a bit more than I like you." Oh. Well, his wife didn't take that lying down. She went to all of his clients in his attorney's business, and she said, "You shouldn't be doing business with a man like this." So, faced with the loss of his livelihood, Mr. Cormac took all of his money, took his serving maid, got on a boat, and went to the Carolinas. And that was where I was born, in 1697. Well, now I grew up mostly in town because while my father had bought a plantation and had planned on being a planter, he knew nothing about running a farm. But he needed the plantation because he could not work as an attorney in the New World. There simply weren't enough people. There were only a couple of thousand people living in Charleston at that time. So I grew up mostly in town. I grew up partly out on the plantation. And there's quite a number of stories that have been told about me. You see, people have done a great deal of careful research, which started back in the 1700s by going into bars and buying drinks for pirates and saying, "What kind of stories can you tell me?" The problem is that when the stories run out before the drinks run out, then the stories get made up. So I'm here to tell you that I did not, in fact, knife one of my own serving maids with some of the silver cutlery, nor did I burn down my father's plantation. But what I did do was when I turned about 16 years old, I made an amazing discovery. Something which no one had ever discovered in the history of the world before. I realized that my parents were idiots. Here's my father telling me to behave myself. And did he behave himself? And here's my mother telling me to be a lady. Was she a lady? Not quite. She's still not married to the man she's living with. Because after all, it's the 1700s and we can't get a divorce. So I decided that I wanted to do something to show my parents that I was a modern young woman and I had a great deal of contempt for all the things they wanted me to do. I didn't want to sit still. I didn't want to cross my feet at the ankles. What was I going to do? There was no loud music to be played. There were no rules about drinking for me to ignore. So I did the next best thing. I went down to the port and I began hanging about with pirates. Now you might wonder how a well-brought-up young lady would even know about the existence of pirates. But you see, pirating isn't not quite the way that you think it is. Pirate ships were small, like this one here, but they crammed 60 or 100 men onto them. And they'd go out into the Caribbean and they'd rob 5 or 6 ships. It'd take maybe 6 weeks. Then they'd come back into port. They'd sell off all their stuff, whatever they'd stolen, which in the Caribbean was very often rice and indigo and tobacco and sugar. They'd sell it to the local merchants, who liked them just fine, mind you, because they were selling the stuff cheap. And then the merchants, they could pass that savings on to you. And everybody made quite a bit of money. And once the pirates had the money, what did they do? Oh, regular run-of-the-mill pirate off of a run like that, 6 weeks, he'd make about 2 years' salary. He'd head straight into port, and he'd spend all of it in about 2 months. Tipping the serving girls left and right, throwing money on the table. Everybody liked pirates. Well, except that my father was not especially thrilled about the fact that I was hanging about with them. You see, I'd had young men to court me, proper young men who came in and said, "Why, Miss Cormack, how is your dear mother today? Miss Cormack, how does your father's plantation do?" Now, pirates don't quite say that sort of thing when they're courting you. They say, "Come on over here, girl, and have a glass of rum." They say, "Sit on my knee here, girl." They say, "Would you like to dance?" And pretty soon they say, "Would you care to go upstairs with me, because I've got something very, very interesting that I would like to show you." Well, I liked rum, I found. I liked dancing quite a bit. And as for all those interesting things that the gentleman cared to show me upstairs, I liked that even more. As a matter of fact, pretty soon I had a couple of interesting things to show them. And me father was just as unhappy as I wanted him to be. Now, I became acquainted with quite a number of young men. But one of them treated me rather different. His name was James Bonny. I called him Jimmy. And Jimmy said, "Anne, you're much too good a woman to live like this. You're a fine, educated girl, and you shouldn't be hanging about with just anybody. You should be with someone who loves you." He said, "I love you, Anne." And I fell in love with him. And my father said, "He's out after my money. You're my only child, and you'll inherit everything, and he knows it." And I said, "You don't understand love. You've never understood love in your life." I was about 17 then. And my father said, "I'm going to cut you off without a cent." So I proved him wrong. I went off and I married James Bonny anyway. And then I come to a most embarrassing observation. You see, in this one instance, my father was right. James Bonny found out that I had been cut off without a cent. He was very, very angry with me. Now, the problem is that if you go to beat an Irish girl, she's just as likely to beat you right back. And we got into it pretty well, let me tell you. But we had nothing to live on, except whatever he earned as a pirate. Pretty soon he'd run through all of his money, so he had to go out to sea. I was pretty unhappy with this gentleman. There's still plenty of laps. There's still a great deal of rum. Plenty of other pirates that we could show each other things. And he comes back from his trip. He says, "Anne, what have you been up to?" And I said, "Well, what do you think?" He says, "Anne, you can't be doing that. You're a married woman." I said, "Ha, you lied when you married me. It's not a good marriage. Forget you. I'll do what I please." I had a habit of doing what I pleased. Well, we hung about until his money had run out, and I helped him run through it. Then he's got to go back out to sea. I didn't miss him. He comes back again. He says, "Anne, you got to stop doing this." He says, "The other pirates are laughing at me." I said, "Well, you didn't need no help to look like a fool." We got into it again. He says, "That's it. I'm taking you. You're my wife. You have to travel with me. You can't get a divorce. Taking you, we're going to go to the Bahamas. We're going to go to New Providence. Start over." Now, you folks might not have heard about New Providence. Back in the early 1700s, New Providence in the Bahamas was run entirely by pirates. There'd been wars going back through the Caribbean. The countries in Europe were fighting left and right. And while they'd been doing all of this, this particular port had been originally Spanish. The English took it. The Spanish tried to take it back and failed. The French tried to take it back, took it for a while, then the English took it back. Then the Dutch fired on it a couple of times, but they didn't take it. And then the English decided it was too much trouble and they all moved out. leaving a town that had been bombed quite a bit. Beautiful harbor. And a few people who were scared to death and living in the woods. And into this beautiful harbor comes the pirates. Jennings and Hornigold came in there first, and they set up a pirate republic. They were the law, such as it was. And the merchants, all those folks who wanted to buy the cheap things that the pirates were selling, they came in right after them. They bought what the pirates had to sell. And they sold them shot, and they sold them rum. They sold them gunpowder, just the things that pirates need. And ladies came from all over the world, the sort of ladies that like to entertain pirates, hang about with pirates. Pretty soon it was a boom town. And that's the place that my husband took me, thinking that I would calm down in such an atmosphere. Well, I did not calm down.